I would never invest in somebody who says my only goal is to sell their company. There's always something to manage. There's always some problems to be solved. That is where the magic happens. If you're being the CEO or the founder of a company, sometimes you are very lonely. Feedback is a gift if it's given in the right way.
Welcome to Banking on Success, the podcast in which leaders share their insights about transformation, about their vision of growth, and about leadership across CE and beyond. My name is Elica Kavrakova, and my co-host today is, again,
Valerie Krömer-Konnes.
And both of us are delighted to have a special guest, and we're excited maybe because our guest today is not a banker, but one of the most famous entrepreneurs in Austria, Florian Gschwandtner. Welcome and thank you for accommodating us in your schedule today. And allow me, before we pick up your brain on exactly growth and leadership and entrepreneurship, to share with our particularly international audience some words about you. You founded back then, 2009, with some fellow students, Runtastic, which evolved quite quickly with millions of users, to one of the most successful fitness platforms. And then a few years later, in 2015, you sold it to Adidas, if I remember correctly, for 220 million, which was one of the most successful startup exits. You stayed, though, with the company and led it until 2019. And afterwards, after your exit, you were acting as investor, business angel, and also in a function which I loved when I saw it, Chief Growth Officer for Tractive, which is another successful scale-up. So this leads me already to my first question. Have you always been entrepreneur-minded? So what made you go this direction rather than, let's say, pursuing a classical, traditional corporate, in brackets, path?
So maybe first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for the very kind introduction. You did your homework. So a lot of things have been
bankers.
said. Well, but back to the question. You know, I grew up on the farm. And somehow, I think later in my life, I understood what I have learned as a kid was already a little bit of an entrepreneurial journey. Because at the farm at home, it's not like you can do what you want. You have to adapt. If the weather is bad, you can't go out at the fields, but you have to work at home, indoors. At the weekends, you know, we had animals like pig farming and so on, and cow farming. You have to take care of your animals. You have to take care of your goods. And so somehow I think I learned already back then, there's always something to manage. There's always some problems to be solved. And also what I saw from my father and from my mother, when we had an idea about doing something, you know, rebuilding the house, changing something, it was always an idea. Then we wrote it down and then we did it, you know, and that's a little bit what entrepreneurship is about. And I think most people fail because so many people come to me also as an investor, want to pitch their idea. And I tell them, we all do have ideas. We have many ideas. But from an idea into execution, that is where the magic happens. And there's, I think, where most people already fail because they always dream of the idea. And I say, you know, I have 100 ideas. And I'm quite sure if you would do that right, you would be successful. But you have to get going, I think.
If I may chip in here, because you kind of already even take my next question. I've been asking myself many times, also in my professional career, I always somehow thought that entrepreneurship is something which one is as a skill, as a spirit born with. But now from your words, I understand it's not about that. It's about the, you know, making it happen from the idea to the result, i.e. every one of us can be entrepreneur.
I'm 100% sure of that. I think it's not, you know, of course, sometimes people are a little bit more gifted with thinking outside of the box, having more courage, doing things. But other than that, what entrepreneurship is about is get started somewhere. You know, most people, especially in the startup business, they start like at the weekend or getting home from work and then working on something. And very often, it's also when you search for your first job or whatever you're doing, I ask people, what are you doing in your spare time when you don't get paid or when you don't talk to anybody else? What does motivate you? Where are you getting excited about? And of course, best case scenario would be turning this favor you have, that hobby or whatever it might be, into a business. And very often that's doable. But most people think, in our society, we learned, no, that's the way. I go to school, I go to middle school, I do my A-levels, I do my study, and then I start as a lawyer or whatsoever. Don't get me wrong. It's all fine being a lawyer, being a banker, being everything. But I think there's a lot of chances missed that people never tried. And I think this is a big chance. Try something out, especially when you are young. You can't lose that much.
Is this the way how you define success? To try something you've never tried, or is how?
I
what
think
is
it's
success?
the first part of success. Exactly, the first part of success is already from an idea, from a dream, from something in your head, in your brain, into action. And that's not even business related, because that also could be, I want to do a vacation, I want to do something at the weekend, I want to just get something done, so to say. I think that's the first part of success. Later, success, I think in life, there are different stages. As a young boy, you're going out the very first time, you want to talk to a girl, maybe this is success, you know what I mean? And then you're getting a lot of no's. That's probably not so successful, but part of the bigger success is also that things are not working out great. And I think also when I talk in front of young people, I tell them, go out and get your no's wherever it is. When we started Runtastic, we searched for some money, and we went, I think, to more than 50. Back then, there were no business angels, but let's call it people, they invest, and they all knew why it's not working. It was, no, that's stupid, what are you doing? Nobody will ever run with a phone. For founders, that can't work at all. And I think it's very important. No will always be there in life, but just because somebody tell you something, no, it doesn't mean that I believe you and that you know who am I, what is going on here, what is going on here. So I think that's a big lesson learned in my life.
Is that the mindset you always had on you? When you get a no, when you're in a failure, when you doubt yourself, what keeps you motivated, or what keeps you persevere? And you talked about, having the thought and then putting into action, or putting it into execution, I would say. This is also something we do a lot,
Yeah, sure.
And what keeps you going in this,
I think to answer the first part of the question, was that always like this? I would say no. I didn't have this at the beginning of my life, and there were also doubt. And, I went to a school where I didn't want to go, a little bit pushed by my parents, that I should take over the farm, which never was in my intent, and so on. But at a certain point, when I was probably 18, 19, I knew I can do what I want. I'm a grown-up. I'm allowed to go study some technology, software, whatsoever. But even there, I figured out that's not exactly what I really love. So I did a second study. And later on, I think what I really figured out, if you are persistent, I think that's one of the most important topics in life. Keep going. But if you keep going a little bit further and longer than most of the people, you're getting in this extra mile. There's where the magic happens. Mm-hmm. That's also when I started my first my podcast. I took to my co-host and I said, we're doing it at least for 1 year, because the average podcast host is stopping after 36 episodes. And it's hard. There's vacation. You have to bring your mic. There's no excuse. I have to deliver. My podcast is always out there on Saturday, so I have to do it. And after a year and so on, we became more and more successful because only probably 34% of the people are still here. So you're competing not to everybody anymore. And I think that is in life very often the truth, because it's getting hard somewhere. To be honest, it's never easy. There's no journey. There is no, later on you look at Runtastic, say, oh, wow, nice. There was a big exit, 220 million. You were lucky guys. Of course, there was some luck involved, but there was also a lot of weekends and studies before and a lot more involved. And we kept going further and further and further. And there, I think, is really where different things are happening.
This makes me think now, and while you were speaking, I was thinking about, I have a 17-year-old son, yeah? And because you say, and I fully agree, persistence, this is a certain kind of discipline necessary to just keep going and not give up after the second, third, fourth time. However, I see a younger generation living in an environment which is very quickly changing. So why one hype chases the other. Now, how such skills can be, or what a parent should do in order to give this, persistence skill to the kids, which are necessary also to be entrepreneur? Because I have the feeling everyone wants to be, let's say, a YouTuber, but also for YouTubing,
It's tough.
you need discipline. So what is this? Is there something which one needs to know if you wish to be? Doesn't matter what type of entrepreneur, which needs to be grown.
Yeah, I hear you.
To be educated.
Yes. A very good question. My little one is only 3 years old, and I'm already thinking, how should that all work in this life we are in now, where they have the TikToks and whatever the attention span is, 0.3 seconds. What is this going to be? But back to your example, I think it's a good example from YouTube. The most successful YouTuber is Mr. Beast. So he started as a young kid. And he said, I think a year ago in a podcast, when he would do it all over again and he start from nothing again as a YouTuber right now, he would be 100% successful again. And then he explained it why. Because he would start and he would keep going, improving, keep going, improving. And he said, when people are coming to him and say, oh, what's the magic sauce? What's the recipe to be successful at YouTube? He says, how many videos have you already done? And if somebody says, I've done 3 videos, he said, come back to me when you have done your first 100 videos. And then I will talk to you, because you will see one thing. After that, you have done 100 videos, you will be already there and not there, because you keep learning on the way. And I think the most important, you just mentioned it. I'm also big in the fitness part, and people, you read on Instagram and so, motivation quote, motivation. But it's not the motivation, it's the discipline. I'm very often not motivated going for a run in the morning. It's like people always think, oh, I love it, 6 o'clock in the morning, you're doing my run. I love the feeling.
Yes, no runner.
It doesn't,
Same here.
It doesn't matter at all. But what I love is when I'm coming back and having this feeling, I have my green check mark already at 7 o'clock in the morning. Whatever the day will bring, I have my check. And I think fitness is very, very related to discipline and not motivation. And this is in life, again, very important skill you should bring with. And I think you also can train that. And it's not always easy. It's not always be fun. And I think the generation, the Gen Z, the Gen Alpha, however they all will be called in future, I think we have to learn that we are not only consuming and said, I want to be a YouTuber. I consume 3 hours of YouTube, then consume 1 hour, and 2 hours you are getting to become you're being a builder. And then you also build and try. And I think that's the big difference between consuming. That's also on Wikipedia, YouTube, 98% are consuming, 2% or 1.5 are doing a little bit more, editing, commenting, liking, hyping, whatever there's possible, and 0.5% are really creating. And that's a big difference. Become a creator. And then, same story, discipline, persistence, learn, fail, get up, learn again, repeat, and you're getting better on the way. That doesn't mean that you are just for sure becoming successful, but the probability that you are in a totally different space, no matter what are you doing, whether then you're becoming a lawyer, a doctor, whatever, you're already being, I think the fundamental work is already done, that you are becoming more likely, more successful than only as a consumer.
One thing I know already, when we have this podcast in the pocket, the link will be sent
to the sun.
to my.
May I chip in
Absolutely,
one question?
go ahead.
Sure.
When you talk about discipline, my motivation for sport, and you were talking about discipline, is food. So if I don't do,
You wanna eat
if I
good
don't
food.
do sport, I cannot eat. But do you have a daily routine, really a fixed daily routine that you really adhere to? And
now, for
keep
example,
going?
I have now a small fitness startup again, and we're doing a push-up app. You put the phone on the floor and you're doing push-ups. They are being automatically counted. And since 963 days, because I did it in the morning, I did everyday push-ups. Every day 50 to 100.
Wow.
It takes 3 minutes. Yeah, wow.
50 to 100.
Yeah, but it only takes 3 minutes. It doesn't matter whether you do 5, 10,
Yeah,
15.
yeah.
Either you're getting up, you're doing it immediately, but it's really 3 minutes a day. And think about, you spend 1 hour at the gym. It's only 4% of the time of the day, but this 1 hour defines the 96% of the other time. You're being fitter, you're allowed to eat more, you're allowed to get a dessert, you deserved it, so to say. And I think everybody has to build his own system of motivation and discipline. For some, they work better. Okay, I'm doing my sports. I'm allowed to go out for dinner. Very fine today. Another one say, I want to just become faster at running. I have a leaderboard with my colleagues. When we implemented our leaderboard in the Runtastic app, for women, it didn't matter at all. They were not competing each other who run faster and further and so on. For men, this was like, oh, crazy. Oh, there's the last day of the week and I'm only fourth place. I have to run 21 kilometers now to take over the lead and so on. So it's different aspects and motivations, I would say. But I think it's my routine is doing everything a little bit fitness related each day. So yesterday I came home very late. I knew it was only 25 minutes, but 25 minutes are a big difference to doing nothing. And so it's very seldom that people are coming to me, now I don't have time for sports. I'm also a father. I run a few companies in parallel. I think I'm doing a lot, but there's always time for sports if you want to do it. You can get up an hour earlier. Does it make fun all the time? No. But is it doable? Yes. It's just how to prioritize in your life. And, I don't push anybody to do so. But if you want to become an entrepreneur and be successful, with 40 hours a week, it won't work. I tell you from the very early beginning. That's not how the life works or the world works.
You make me, I'm so thoughtful because I fully resonate, in terms of, and you're right, it's same on my side, to be very frank. It's just this by far more than 40 hours a week. And it's a matter of prioritization. If you want it, you'll get it. I wanted to ask something else, but now turning back because we've spoke and you mentioned apps, etc. In how far, the app, the telephone, the technology will replace the classical going into the fitness club and all other training in groups. This is popping up to my mind the very spontaneous question: Will we be on our own, train like with our techno trainer?
I don't think so. What we're seeing right now, that first of all, fitness is growing very, very fast, faster than ever before. There are more gyms opened in 2026 than ever before in life. What means that people are being way more aware of body cult and longevity and all this. Your son and whomever, the young target group, back then, they were drinking, smoking, all that stuff. Now they look at Instagram and say, I want to also look good. It's not a must-have, but there is something. So I think that's a good trend, first of all. Then secondly, we're seeing, for example, run clubs are getting bigger than ever before. The people are getting together, companies have run clubs, and that's really a big trend. There's DJ, I think, is it Tiesto? Yeah, I think so, are doing his own run club, and thousands of people are following in the United States, even before he's going into the nightclub, things like that. So I think human beings are still social. And that hopefully won't never change. Even though there are some really bad metrics, especially young men in the US. So Professor Scott Galloway doing a good podcast about that, talking about that people are being more time at home in front of the screen, having their virtual girlfriends, and there's some weird stuff happening, what is not good in my opinion. Nonetheless, on the counter side, so to say, you see the other trend that we are social, we want to go out, we want to be together. Do we have our phones, our rings, our whoops, whatever with us to be supported? Yes. And I think that's a good thing. I think we also talk about that, how that will look in the future. Now we are tracking data and then we're analyzing, I slept well, I got sick. I think in the future, I think it's proactive. We know what we're having our data that we can really predict what is going to happen with my body, with my immune system and stuff like that. But I think there's a big change, but still we are being very social as human beings. And I think that's a good skill.
Yeah, agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Switching gears a bit, what were the moments, professionally, personally, whatever you would like to share, which made you what you are?
I think childhood is always a very important moment, even though when you are a child, you don't understand it, of course. But I think 20 years later, you look back and said, okay, that made sense. And again, as I mentioned already, with growing up at the farm, learning probably a very broad skill set, but don't be a specialist in something. That helped me later on in my career a lot, because even though I studied software engineering, I was never the best engineer. But I always loved to build products, and I think I understood, or I had this skill set of I could talk to the doctor, but also to the farmer. And I could translate the techie into the marketing or the sales guys. And I think that is, nowadays we call that, or that's a big question always with AI, what is going to happen, which kind of skill set you should have. And they talk about this T skill set, which means it should be very broad above. And then you have 1 or 2 specializations into something where you're really good in it. Because, knowledge is getting very democrated, or you get it everywhere, so to say, and very cheap. But I think the childhood was one part. Then there was a part when I went to the agricultural college, which I didn't love back then. And I also never liked it a lot, but it was a very tough time for me for 5 years. But I knew when I'm over that, I'm allowed to do whatever I want. And I think having these tough times already as a teenager helped me a lot for my life later, because later somehow everything became very easy for me, because it was really hard when I was 14 to 19. And that helped me a lot, that on purpose, when I did my first internship during my study, I could have done it in my hometown, or I go to Vienna. Of course, Vienna is not super far away, but no apartment, I don't know any people here, and so on. And I decided without any thinking, I'm going to Vienna because it's the harder way for me. I will learn more, there will be something new. At home, I know my friends, I'm in a comfort zone. And I always like to break out of the comfort zone with the belief that it pays back. Somehow that worked out. I can't particularly say this was a good decision, that was a good decision. I did my internship in the Ukraine, in northern Germany. I always did something what was not easy back then, so to say. And somehow
so
that
de
shaped
facto,
me.
looking back, you're grateful to your parents that they kind of forced you not to be for a couple of years in your comfort zone, but
It's hard to tell. I would not really say
no,
thank
because
you for doing
nowadays
so.
also for coming back to the
Yeah.
next generation, currently it's a lot of liberal
Yeah,
education.
yeah.
Let's call it democracy. The kids can also say, I want this, I want that. And the way we educated, socialized next generation earlier was much more stricter.
Yes.
It's like you go there, you do that.
Yeah.
So the question is, again, in how far entrepreneurial spirits and this type of, the discipline which helps you persist and achieve goals, in how far this is not going to a certain extent away.
I do agree. I think it's not good if everything you want, you get, first of all, and that life is so easy, especially when you are young, because later you will see it's definitely not. When you are being on your own, you're being a grown-up, life is not easy. Let's be honest. And there might be some tough days, tough decisions, tough times. And as sooner or as soon as possible you understand that, and I think the best time is already as a kid, that it's not like I would like to have a wish and every wish comes true, because that's not reality in life. And I'm also, like you mentioned now, a little bit concerned about that. Usually we always say the human species always managed it on their own way. When I talk to, my grandpa is 97, has 17 siblings. So I grew up in a big family. There were many, many people. And still, he's the oldest one. He's still living. I just visited him at the weekend. And he was just he is such a good human being. And they never had a lot, he was even World War II and stuff like that. And he's still alive. And again, being 18 kids from one mother, you can imagine, or we almost can't imagine what that does
nowadays.
mean. There was not a lot of luxury or something like that. And all of them somehow made it in a very good way as very good human beings through life. And I think that's even the bigger goal, that we don't forget what life is all about. That's not only about success and money and whatever you have and so on. So the basics are somehow very, very easy, very principle basics. Yeah.
I can somehow imagine because I'm 1 out of 8.
Oh wow!
So
Yeah.
Still,
You have
And
an
I'm
idea?
married into a big family, so I know
yeah.
what.
and I have 3 kids that I really try to push, and I don't sweep everything out of their lives and push them a lot and ask them also nowadays to start working early and to have projects and to have dreams. I think this is very important. I mean, as you said, and did you have somebody who pushed you,
Nah.
or did you just,
It was
intrinsic,
it's
you motivate
kind of
yourself?
funny. My father is this guy who's always funny, and let's do that. You should go study. It's perfect. Yeah, that's good. And my mother was always, she learned with me. We trained. She didn't push me, but she made sure that things are getting done and that I'm on the right path, so to say. Even though, as a teenager, you do a lot of things you should not do, but never in a really bad way. But so there was always a good corridor, I would say. But it was, I also were a little bit different as a kid. When I got home, the first thing I want to do is my homework. Always. That was the first thing. Usually it's quite different. You go out playing soccer, whatever, and then in the last minute you're doing. That was always a skill I had totally different. I want to get stuff done and then enjoying life, so to say. And that's still very similar now.
I'm just thinking, what of all you have said so far and shared with us in terms also of skills and qualities, what is applicable same way for a classical corporate career, for a leader in a corporate organization?
How do you mean that?
What is the common between entrepreneur like you and a corporate leader?
Us.
Yeah,
And us.
yeah,
Us.
yeah.
We are in a big organization.
Yeah.
And that's
I think, first of all, you have to understand what do you want to achieve. As an entrepreneur, obviously you want to be somehow successful. But even there's many ways of success. No? There are the guys who are saying, I want to sell this company for big money, that I'm getting rich, which is almost, in my opinion, the wrong way. I would never invest in somebody who says my only goal is to sell their company. Then there's these other guys, they say, we want to build a nice company, being profitable, can afford, can employ, having employees, having colleagues, and so on. And the career path, I think also in a corporate, you should know what you want to become and how you are getting there. There's a good leadership book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People from Stephen Covey. And he says there's one habit is start with the end in mind. So when you build a house, you imagine how does the house look like? You're going through the door the first time, even though there's nothing. And I think it's a little bit similar also in corporate. So I never worked with Adidas, yes, but not really in a corporate, so to say. But I also would like to understand where am I now and where I want to be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and at least building for myself a path. And usually it's always better if you communicate a path to your boss or whoever. When you sit together, say, I'm here now, I want to be there. What should I do? What do you expect from me? I know what I expect from myself, or I understand it in a corporation. There's hierarchies and all that stuff. And then building a path. It's a little bit like setting goals. I think too many people are not setting goals. We have now an intern in my company only for 3 months, and we define totally clear goals. Because I want to understand that, if it should not be red, it's not good for him and not good for me. So there's some expectation management from my side, and maybe there's some expectation management from your side. And if you want to over-deliver, I told him what he can do to over-deliver. And he's doing very well, but he knows exactly what is our expectation management. And when he want to go above there's something we can do. And there might be 10 people, and if 2, 3 out of them over-delivering continuously, I think the probability and the chances they are getting somewhere higher, or whatever you want to call it in the corporate, the probability is very high.
It's actually very simple. Clear goal,
Yes.
clear communication,
Yes.
and execution.
But I mean, for us, we also do that with our teams. We have to set the goals.
Sure.
We have to, tell them where do you want to be in 3 years and things like that. So we do that constantly in
And
our
reviews.
in our communication. But I sometimes you feel that entrepreneurship, as being your own boss, is quite different. But when I listen to you, it's not so different.
I think what is different, if you're being the CEO or the founder of a company, sometimes you are very lonely because there is nobody with you up there. Either you have co-founders, that's good, but nonetheless, it's like problems and challenges. They are getting up the ladder, and there's you. Therefore, I did also. I was a lot in the United States, in Silicon Valley. We had an office in San Francisco, and basically every CEO there told me they have a coach, a business coach, a mentor, psychologist, whatever it was. So when I came back, I said, okay, maybe I need a coach. I don't know. I have no idea. So I talked to a psychologist, and she was very international. She understood who am I. And I said, okay, at least I'm going there 4 times, and let's see, maybe I learn something. In the first session, I would have stopped, but I convinced myself 4 times is the minimum, like with the podcast, 1 year. After the second session, it felt better. And we talked a few things, and there were very little examples, and I'm happy to share one example with you. I told her I finished the meeting, and then I ran into the other meeting because the next meeting normally started. And she said, Florian, what did you say? You were running through your own office? She said then, only slaves are running. You're not being a slave, so to say. It was kind of shocking for me. What did you just say? But what she want to tell me, you're being the boss of the company. You should be calm. You should walk to your office, never run. Because what means when the CEO is running, everybody is, there's something happening. And then we understood, okay, our meeting takes till from 2 till 3 o'clock, and 3 o'clock the next meeting starts. How should you go to the restroom? How should you get a glass of water? Not doable. So we skipped our meeting time then to 50 minutes instead of 60 minutes, to 25 instead of 30. And it was a little bit smoother. And I never ever, always when I started almost running, I remembered, you don't run, you walk.
An excellent example. Yeah.
It so much reminds me of what my grandmother always said, and it's very old-fashioned. She always says, "A lady doesn't run, not after anybody." And I'm that comes up to my mind, and it's
the same metaphor,
but it's a kind of the same thought,
Exactly,
you don't
exactly.
don't run,
particularly as a leader, because the people are looking at you, and every mood, every movement, the body language speaks.
It's like the smooth sailor getting even calmer in the stormy sea, So
Exactly.
yeah.
Who else is supporting you apart from the psychologist?
I think friends, definitely. And also, to be honest, you don't have that many friends, or good friends. Let's call it like this. I think it's always one hand where you can count your good friends. I also think with communities, with our podcast, we have a big community, and people are being here and there very honest. And that's what I like about people. I think feedback is a gift. If it's given in the right way, can be constructive. Don't get me wrong. Definitely, you only can get better when you get good feedback. And sometimes you have to learn to ask for feedback. That's what I'm also doing with friends. We're doing so little challenges just to quick check in. Is there a likelihood that you're becoming an asshole somewhere? Just make sure, we don't behave like we should not. No? And I think getting this feedback from people that really know you, I think that's always good. And I think that's also a little bit what friendship is about, when you can behave like you are and nobody's judging you because people know you.
This should be the real friendship, when you can be the way you are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But nowadays, that's getting harder and harder. I see that. I just did a podcast with a young guy, was quite successful, got a lot of reach on YouTube. Of course, you're getting a lot of feedback, and then there's somebody taking 6 seconds of a frame of 75 minutes out there and judging you what you just said. A little bit like media works now. And that's bad, but the clickbaiting still works. I get it. But then I see my mother is reading the reviews or whatever, what people are writing, and she's, oh my God, he said, you are a bad guy, you are doing this, that. And I do understand why people are starting being more quiet and not going into a podcast, not talking to the media at all, because you can't win that much sometimes. I still think, and I do believe, by telling a story, 90% you are motivating people. At least that is what I'm seeing. The people are, the intern who is working for me right now, he said he read my book like 6 years ago, and therefore he started to study software and things like that. I think that's still You have a role model role sometimes, leadership, all that stuff. I think that's way, way bigger than the bad news. But still, there's always some bad news. And I totally get it, unfortunately, that nowadays some people are saying, I'm doing well. I don't care about anybody else. And why should I talk to somebody? I think that's not going in a good direction at all.
And when we talk about friendships, I think friendships are a very closed, small circle. But coming to a little bit of a larger one, how important do you think is a networking I personally feel it is very important, but for my job and for our surrounding. But how do you feel as?
I once wrote in my book that networking is what did I write? Overvalued or overhyped. I tell my startups and my entrepreneurs where I'm invested at the beginning, you don't need any network. You only have to work on your product. Make your product so good that people are using it. Because that's the first KPI as an entrepreneur. It's not the network. It's nice if you know 1,000 people whatsoever, but this is wasted time, in my opinion, at the beginning and startup life. I think later on, networking can make sense, but also can be wrong. I think what I'm seeing when I'm going out to network, more people want something from me than I would need from them. So it's not that easy. You're getting... Of all channels, after the podcast, I got 4 personal letters sent home, 4 to 6 pages long. Really nice people, most of them. Some of them just need money, but some of them, they want to meet and so on. And I can't do it. There's no resources for that. Then there's probably, I counted up to 600 messages. Which you basically almost can't answer. Now you don't answer, and they say, he's such an arrogant.
Yes.
So that's a little bit the game. But back to your question, I think at a certain point, the network always can make sense. But before I start networking, nowadays I would work more on my personal brand. I would make sure that my LinkedIn is good, because I have a different scale. I don't have to go to an event and meet 5 people there, talk a lot, then going home. Then following up, in that time, at least I could write a good blog post, a good LinkedIn post, and Instagram. It depends a little bit who you are and in which business you are. Don't get me wrong. I totally get it that some businesses are more people related than others. But where I'm coming from, digital business, we have to scale big. If I get 5 more downloads, it's nice, but it doesn't matter at all. If I get a video which is seen by 2 million people, that makes sense. And therefore, it's always important to understand where is your scale. And what is your goal? We're getting a little bit back to your career path. Sometimes networking is more important, but for a lot of jobs in the digital era, I think it's sometimes overvalued, in my opinion.
Good thought.
But you've mentioned something very important, Eric, and resonate, and I agree. The possibility and to work on the personal branding, because this creates as well the network. And by the way, connecting also to what you've said beforehand. And you mentioned LinkedIn. Many people, even they don't give a like or comment, they feel motivated from the content you write and see you as a role model. So this is at least my perception. So if one learns to use it properly, it could maybe even support you from one day getting even away from a corporate career and maybe creating something on your own, just because building a personal brand is part of the way.
And it's not so time consuming as you might think. If you have your patterns and it's a little bit in your routine again, like the push-ups, a LinkedIn post, and I don't write it with AI, to be honest. I write it really by hand, but usually it never takes longer than 15 minutes. And 15 minutes is okay.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Twice a week, 15 minutes. And then being a little bit interactive, liking, commenting some other stuff. You can build, from 0 to 10,000 followers. That's always doable in 2 years.
True. Another question, purely out of curiosity, if you can share any observation, are there more females or males who are getting into the startup and are starting or want to be entrepreneurs?
Unfortunately, still more males. Yeah. And that's still, I think this is the narrative we are having in our country. Also, when you think about all those MINT subjects, mathematics, informatics, and all that stuff, that it starts already at the parents, then the teachers, because it's like if a girl wants to go in a very technical college, it's like, oh no, that's only for boys, so to say. There's still this narrative of you should do that, the boys should do that. And I think that's totally old school and should not be the case anymore. I think it's changing a little bit, but unfortunately too slow in my opinion, because we would need way more women in entrepreneurship. I think there's also statistics that women are being more successful because they're being more reliant and, working a little bit harder, all that stuff. Unfortunately, it's still tough. I see it also, when we're doing our podcast event, there's 400 people. It was just a few weeks ago. And we're searching for speaker because we're always getting criticized for not 50-50, not being equal. First of all, we're in the tech scene. So there's more male than female, of course. And if you ask 10 women to get on stage, 9 of them or 8 say, no, I don't want to be on stage. I think that's also a little bit still a challenge we do have. I don't know why it is like this, but it's a fact, so to say.
It's connected, I guess, with what you've mentioned yourself before, that it's the way how girls generally are socialized still, unfortunately, in being the good ones and the silent ones and not the ones climbing on the tree.
Yeah.
And,
that might be right.
And I guess also not being socialized in team games where you fight, but then after the football match, you go for a beer. Right, with a teammate. So I guess several factors, but you're right. The topic of visibility is a big one, and you're also very engaged in the topic of female empowerment and mentoring.
Yes.
So,
and I always encourage my daughter. She's in the middle, she's between the two boys, to go her own way and earn her own money. And she's a football trainer, so
nice.
for little kids still. But I think it is, yes, but somehow it's also a little bit in our genes, I would say. Some things are in our genes. I think we play it more safe.
Yeah, that's fair. Maybe a little bit more protective.
And then if we decide to have children, it's always quite hard to be an entrepreneur, and then you have to have a break. I mean, you have to have a break. This is natural. But still, I think, what do you think? How can we motivate them? How can we motivate females to go into this, maybe moving out of the comfort zone, giving it a chance, and also trying and also facing failure? I think we have this.
I wouldn't break that down to female or man or male. I think it's in general more, how do we motivate people to give it a chance to become an entrepreneur, to try to risk something. I think it's a cultural topic again, failure culture. In Austria here, still very tough. You failed as an entrepreneur, then everybody's finger pointing at you. It was very clear that won't work and why you're doing so. In the United States, you're being celebrated. Oh, you failed 2 times, great. That's very good, because the 3rd time you will win. And I said that if I could hire from 2 person and one would have been a failed entrepreneur and the other one would be just a normal career path, I would always take the failed entrepreneur, because the skill set here is way higher. He saw more. He had to take more action. Again, to change a culture, that takes years, whether it's in a company or it's in life. We are not there yet, but still, I would say, also based on numbers, we are on an okay track to get better. And also, that's maybe one of the little advantages of social media and stuff like that people could see, oh, this girl started something, became successful, because we did not have that back when I was a kid. I could not look up who is Justin Bieber and blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Having this idol somewhere, or want to be in the whole world on stages, because there was the farm. Then there was a school in the village, and this is it, so to say, which also had the advantages, but also the disadvantages compared to now. And I would still say we are in an okay way, that people are thinking a little bit bigger, that failure culture is getting better here in Austria, but also in CEE or in this region where we are living. And it's a transformation. It takes time.
Sounds great.
Last question, unfortunately, because I
We
can
could
talk
go
with
on
you for
forever.
hours. Yeah. What would you like to be proud of one day?
Yeah, first of all, that starts, I think, with kids again. So first kid is here, next one is coming in 2 weeks. So
Wow, this is exciting.
This is exciting times, exactly. And, I would hope that they will say, or when they are being between 16 and 20, and they still go on vacation with the parents, that would be one of my biggest wins, first of all. Secondly, I think what I'm feeling right now, or what I already, I wrote a book, I invested in more than 40 plus companies, in young people. And I don't know in numbers, but I would say up to 100 people came to me that they changed their life a little bit. I think it's way more, but it doesn't matter. It's already good if there's one person you can change the life or the idea of what you are doing, becoming an entrepreneur, trying something out. Try to live your dream. And if I can tell this story and that the passion is seen by others and they are getting a little bit motivated. We all do know that. We watch a movie, we listen to a podcast, and we take a little thing with us and say, okay, that was a good motivation, that was a good quote, or that I never saw that like this, and maybe I can change a little bit of the life. I think I'd already be happy if that is happening, that the kids are somehow proud of me and still with me. Most important one. And other than that somebody out there says, hey, that was a good journey and I could learn something out of this journey.
Thank you for that amazing talk.
Yes.
You brought in this room so much energy. It was super motivational. And also a lot of food for thought. So I hope you like it, dear audience, and stay tuned for the next episode of Banking on Success. Thank you.
Thanks
so for having me. I appreciate
and I'm sure
it.
your kids will go on vacation with you.
That's the plan.
Raiffeisen Bank International. Make it happen.